Well, I'm very popular at parties, very popular. The problem is, of course, when you're going out with someone and they say, I'm interested in a long-term relationship, and I say to them, well, unfortunately, I'll be around, but you won't. It's not the kind of thing that people like to hear.
Well, obviously, women aren't really your forte, so why don't we go on to your hobbies? Do you have any really fun hobbies?
I did a kind of spin-off of being able to predict the future. I find one of them is I developed if you're eating in a Chinese restaurant, there are a few of them in France, and at the end of the meal they provide you with a little cookie in which there's a writing. I've found it fabulous. I make these, I write these little fortune messages, which I know to be true, of course.
Yes.
And place them in the cookies. And you imagine the look on a person's face when they open the cookie after a delicious meal and see written there, you will die of food poisoning in an hour. It's just so exciting at the restaurant when everyone sees this person turn white, of course, get very upset. And then others are more innocuous. It's the woman you're with has a sexually transmitted disease of which you will die. Things like that. I've found them to be very popular.
You really are a fun-loving sort. Hello and welcome to History Today. I'm Caitlin Ward, your host. Today we're in Salon, France, with Michel de Nostradamus, better known as Nostradamus, esteemed physician and futurist. Nostradamus.
How do you do?
Lovely to have you here today.
Why, thank you.
I guess we should start at the beginning.
That's always a good place to start, I find.
Tell me when you were born and of what sort of folks you come from.
Well, I was born years ago, back in 1503. Mm-hmm. That was a very portentous date, you might say. I arrived on the planet, and immediately I think the world changed somewhat because I think I got these powers that were given to me at a very early age, and I've since then made enormous use of them. One of them is this very strong ability to see into the future. That's where the name clairvoyant comes from. Of course, clairvoyant meaning someone who sees clearly, and that's really my talent.
So do you think it had, you were predisposed to be clairvoyant, or the fact that you had a marvelous education contributed?
Well, the education had something to do with it. I received the traditional education, of course, in medicine and philosophy, studied all the classics, Latin, Greek, had a well-rounded education, but really, this gift is something quite separate from all of that. It is not something that I learned. It is something that I possess. And I really can't explain it. Sometimes it frightens me. It's an uncanny ability, but one which I have learned to control to some extent.
Didn't you, at a very tender age, exhibit this talent? Isn't there a story about the friar wandering down the road with some other friars?
That story frightened me at first when I saw what happened. I was walking down a country lane and I saw a Franciscan friar, and I immediately was overcome with this feeling of total humility, and I threw myself at his feet, kissed his robe. Why, I don't know. As it later turns out, of course, you'll realize in your time that the reason this was significant is this man eventually will become the Pope. He will become Pope, I believe, Sextus V, and that will happen in about 20 years. And I said to him at the time, Your Holiness, when I addressed him. So how that happened, I don't know. But
don't you get in trouble with the church doing this stuff?
The church considers what I do to be borderline heresy and witchcraft, as well as magic and sorcery. I've come in numerous times close to being challenged by church authorities, and for this reason, I live in this town of Salon, France. I was originally, of course, spent much time in other cities where I was born and where I was raised, back up towards the north, Lyon and other places like that. But because of controversies that develop occasionally, I've found it necessary to stay on the move.
Also, because the church, the book that, yes, we're going to plug today,
Yes, here it is.
doesn't look like you at all.
Well, this is something my publicist sort of dreamed up. You'll notice there's not a heck of a lot of resemblance between me and this figure on the book cover, but hey, the idea here is to sell copies, and he's of a single mind when it comes to matters like that. And as of course I can tell from the future, he's going to be quite successful.
So there's something in it called quatrains.
Quatrains, yes.
Now, you wait one moment. I
Yes.
want to ask you this. You wrote these things in French and Italian and Latin, and all funny, like poems or something, so the church wouldn't get on your tail about it. Am I right about that?
I wouldn't want to say that right now, of course, because, of course, you know, people may be listening who would take it the wrong way. But, of course, when I wrote the book, which is, let me explain this, quatrains, which I use, are simply 4-line rhyming verses, and I write in French primarily. Now, I do make copious use of Latin phrases, Greek phrases, of course, because I'm a learned man. What else would a learned man do but to make use of these things? I can say parvum sed constanta and caterus paribus and in principio erat verbum. I can say these things, of course, and use them in the book. And it provides me with a sense of erudition, of course. But it's also important not only to establish with the church that what I do has nothing to do with sorcery, but also to keep the foolish, uninitiated layman from picking this up and reading the obvious truth. I can't write what I see literally. That would frighten so many people.
Yes.
So what I do is I tell the story of the future with symbols and clues, and they're quite easy to figure out if you are initiated into the science of astrology. And I think that kind of formula works very well.
Well, speaking of the average person, when you go to parties, aren't you quite in demand because people want you to tell their future, and or are you not?
Well, I must say you've touched on a sore point here. I was trained originally and graduated from Montpellier in medicine.
Yes.
I am a physician. I can cure the sick.
You're quite well known for your cures.
As a matter of fact, as you are well aware yourself, we are going through a period of time in the 16th century which the Black Plague has spread
terrible.
throughout Europe, wreaking enormous damage. There is scarcely a family whose lives are not touched by this. I myself have experienced the sad happening of losing both of my sons and my wife to the plague. So it is no small matter which we are teaching.
You dedicated your book to your son Caesar?
That is correct. And in fact, I wrote a number of quatrains directly to him. But to get back to your original question, being a physician and being a successful one has created a number of problems to begin with. When you succeed in curing people of the plague, of course, others hear about this and immediately call you for help. And during my time as a physician, I had enormous success with my cures.
Much beloved, much beloved. You will be remembered in history just for the fact that you were a great physician.
And I should tell you in all confidence that I do feel a sense that all is not right with that. Because, you see, the secret, which I've never explained, to my cures is, of course, my ability to foresee the future. I would see a patient and realize, of course, which patient was going to live or die, and choose successfully, of course, from among those who were going to survive. So if I saw someone who had the plague and I knew they were going to die, I, of course, would say, excuse me, I have to talk to this patient over here. And that patient would be the one who would survive. Of course, I had 100% because I knew who was going to live and who was going to die. Now, at parties, this became a real challenge because I'd be standing there, and of course, you get these people who come up to you. You know how it is when you're a physician. People are always asking you, what can you do about this? It hurts here. This bothers me. That bothers me. This kind of bothersome thing when you're trying to enjoy a glass of wine and some polite conversation.
Yes.
And others will come up to you and, well, now that they know I can foresee the future, I have a double burden. People not only want to come up and get medical treatment, they want to know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so someone who's ill doesn't ask me now how to get better. They say, am I going to get better? Of course, I have to tell them. It's not a pleasant thing to say, no, tomorrow your tongue is going to turn black and the flesh will rot on your bones and you'll be a heap of God knows what lying there to be carted away by a wagon. This is not a pleasant thing to announce at a party. And of course, there are these other people who come up to you and say, they're really, I must say, stupid questions. Like, how long is the 30 Years' War going to last? this kind of question. They're imbeciles. But of course, I'm forced to deal with these people at all times. So I try to give these people a simple answer, one that won't upset them too much. I'll say something like, well, if I were you, I wouldn't go out, do a lot of walking in the cold tonight. Or, have you seen your wife and children lately? You should probably spend a little more time with them in the next few days. One technique I found in groups to work very well when we were at a party would be to say something to the effect that when they all demanded to know, whether they were going to live or die, I'd say, all those who are going to be alive next week, take one step forward. And then I would say, not you, Mr. Lefebvre. And so that would be a polite and kind of innocuous way of getting the message across to Mr. Lefebvre.
You truly are a gentleman.
Yes, I try to be.
So why don't we get to something that I guess is a hobby of yours, astrology? What is astrology?
Yes. Well, astrology is the science of, the science of, let's put it this way, of human knowledge as it relates to the planets and their effects on humans. I, for example, find many skeptics who believe that the planets have nothing to do with our lives here on Earth.
Yes.
And I say to them only one thing. I say to them, especially if they're a woman, for example, I say, do you menstruate? And of course they answer yes, unless there's some illness which prevents that. And I say, how often do you menstruate? And they will say 28 days, generally.
Yes.
And I will say, do you know what the cycle of the lunar movement is? And they'll say, well, I believe it's 28 days. And I'll say, there you have it. Tell me that the planets do not influence human behavior.
You must get a lot of dates with that sort of conversation.
Well, I'm very popular at parties, very popular. The problem is, of course, when you're going out with someone and they say, I'm interested in a long-term relationship, and I say to them, well, unfortunately, I'll be around, but you won't. It's not the kind of thing that people like to hear.
Well, obviously, women aren't really your forte, so why don't we go on to your hobbies? Do you have any really fun hobbies?
I did a kind of spin-off of being able to predict the future. I find one of them is I developed if you're eating in a Chinese restaurant, there are a few of them in France, and at the end of the meal they provide you with a little cookie in which there's a writing. I've found it fabulous. I make these, I write these little fortune messages, which I know to be true, of course.
Yes.
And place them in the cookies. And you imagine the look on a person's face when they open the cookie after a delicious meal and see written there, you will die of food poisoning in an hour. It's just so exciting at the restaurant when everyone sees this person turn white, and of course get very upset. And then others are more innocuous. It's the woman you're with has a sexually transmitted disease of which you will die. Things like that. I've found them to be very popular.
You really are a fun-loving sort.
I try to enjoy myself.
I do want to take a short break, though, because then we'll come back and we will talk about the pork story, the infamous pork story. We'll be right back.
That was quite ridiculous.
Truly fine dining requires that only the freshest ingredients can compete for a place on your plate. Introducing Baron Philippe de Rothschild's Mouton Cadet Bordeaux. Fine food demands a Mouton Cadet.
Life got you boxed in? Call Acme Motivation and get yourself out of that corner and on your way to success.
So, what were you humming when we were on our break? What was that tune?
Oh, I almost forgot. That was sort of my theme song. It's a little Spanish ditty called Que Sera, Sera. I don't know if you know what that means. It means what will be, will be. So when you're a futurist like myself, that
Yes,
kind of
I
thing
got
is
it.
kind of apropos.
I got it, yes.
Okay.
Why don't we try talking about Henry II and your prediction of his death and see if we can get this one right.
This is not something that the court is happy about. You know, the court, I've had to deal with royalty my entire life. At various times they've heard of my fame both as a physician and as a seer of the future, and have requested my presence at various courts and asked me questions about these kinds of things. And I find it, you know, for the most part, they don't pay well. So I'm reluctant to go. The last trip I made, my own expenses were barely covered by what I was paid. But that's the way it is in this business, I suppose. But anyway, Henry, I foretold that, now here's a king who never jousts in the tournaments, or very rarely. And I have foretold that he will die in a tournament. I can read you the passage here. I've forgotten myself. Yes, the way
something
I wrote
about
it down.
an eye. I think you read it to me before
Yes,
the
I
show
have it
started.
here
Something about
on
a
this piece of
gold eye.
parchment.
It's very
The young
creepy.
lion will overcome the old one on a battlefield in single combat. In a cage of gold, his eyes will be put out. 2 wounds in one of them, 2 wounds in one, then to die a cruel death. Now, this quatrain describes Henry's death in a joust. He doesn't know it yet. It's about 20 years into the future, but this is what's going to happen. The irony, of course, is that the phrase "in a cage of gold," this is typical of the way I write my quatrains. The cage of gold is, of course, the jousting helmet that he will be wearing, which covers his head. 2 wounds in one, of course, being both of his eyes will be taken out with the one jousting lance, which is going to penetrate the skull. Then to die a cruel death. And of course, the sad thing is when Henry gets this lance in the head, there's of course no cure for this sort of thing. Aside from being rather unsightly, it's going to stay on for about a week and a half before he festers to death from gangrene. During this period of time, he's not going to be much company to anyone. So you can understand how Henry has not requested my presence to hear this in any great detail. However, Catherine de' Medici makes frequent requests of help from me.
Yes, she's a big fan of yours, isn't she?
Yes, she's on numerous occasions during my
Are her eyes going to be yanked out also? Or?
No, she will do all right, but it's the kids that we're worried about. She has 7 of them, and they're all going to be dead. None of them will ascend to the throne.
All 7?
Yes, I'm kind of torn about whether to tell her this. I'm with them almost all the time, you know. What do you do in a case like this? It's a very touchy subject. You're talking to someone who you know is going to, well, pass on, and this information can be kind of unsettling. So I try to be polite, and I try to try not to announce it in a too abrupt fashion that would frighten people. But there it is. The kids are not going to make it. Should I tell her that? What do you think?
Well, I think that, I don't know. I'm still thinking about how Henry II is going to die.
Got the lance in his head. Yes.
Yes.
That's well, jousting. That's more or less. Well, you know, I could put it this way: a lance in the skull in the Middle Ages is futile. That's the way I would describe it.
Well, you should be able to predict that we were going to have, yes, one more break. And we're going to have these important announcements, then we're going to come back, and yes, I promise we're going to plug this book.
Well, I'm pleased with that, too.
Hi, we're back with Nostradamus. We've been talking about how grisly other people's deaths are, so maybe we should ask you about your own. Do you know when you're going to die?
Sadly, I must admit, yes. But knowing that, I'm prepared for it. You know, a lot of people, here today and gone tomorrow. Myself, I've had a whole lifetime to prepare for this moment, which now is coming up, so I've written a rather extensive will. I know approximately what I'm going to end up in the way of resources and wealth that I can divide among my survivors. And yes, the funeral is going to be in 1566. As a matter of fact, if you care to attend, you certainly can, because from what I can see into the future, the attendance is going to be kind of low, which is kind of distressing. I'm assuming that's because of the rain that'll be falling that day. A lot of people probably won't be able to show up for that because, you know, of course, in these days, if you catch a cold from the rain, that's it. You'll be dead in, 2 to 3 days. That's It's sad, but living in our days means living a short lifespan. People come to me and say, my son has just been born. I want him to live a long and happy life. What can I do to help? And of course, I know the son isn't going to make it until he's much past 16 or 18. And I'll simply tell them, well, send him to a 2-year college. Don't spend a lot of money on a 4-year college because, frankly, it's not a good long-term investment. So I recommend things like that. Don't invest money in things that are long-term returns.
Well, that's very sound advice.
Yes, my own death will occur from, well, the effects of the illnesses I've had my whole life. Arthritis, horrible case of arthritis, and also gout. Gout, a very painful affliction of the foot, usually limited to royalty, but I myself, probably because of the rich foods I've eaten.
And you must drink a lot of red wine, too.
Red wine, all of the things that one should avoid, I have not. And of course, the last act of my life will be when I come down with dropsy. And of course, as you know, when you get dropsy, you drop. And that'll be it, 1566. So I have planned a little bit of a surprise, though, for those people in the future I know who are going to be curious about me.
Yes.
I know I'm going to develop quite a reputation as a
is this the
prophet.
plaque story?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, good.
You've heard this.
Yes.
Too.
Well, you love telling the plaque story.
Yes, I do. You know so many intimate details about me that sometimes I think I know the reason for this, but I can't reveal it to the public. At any rate, in my burial, I will place a plaque over my left shoulder. This will have a date on it. Do you wish to know the date? I don't know how much into detail we want to go, but I have a date.
But if you put the date on it, well...
Not the date of my death.
Right.
But the date upon which they will attempt to open my coffin, take my skull, and drink from it.
But if you tell us what the date is, won't everyone just avoid it that day?
Well, the curious thing about prophecy in the future is that if you're familiar with Cassandra in Greek mythology, Cassandra had the gift of prophecy. But of course, her curse was that no one would listen to her. And that is really truly the problem of the seer of the future. He tells these things, but no one regards it with any true merit. They dismiss it as a hoax. And so, in fact, what comes to pass will come to pass.
So is this a prophecy, this thing with the plaque, or is it just like a little parlor trick where you
well, I'm not above that sort of thing myself. I do know they're going to open it up. And as a surprise, I've decided to put the date, May 1791, when they're going to do it. That's approximately how many years from now? Do you know? Counting in Roman numerals is so hard.
So it's over 200.
Yes, I believe it's XXXMCCCC5. Yeah. And so it's a good ways down into the future, as they say. I was going to say down the pike, but we don't have those yet. These grave robbers will open it and attempt to gain my powers of seeing the future by drinking wine from my skull. That's the traditional way that people attempt to receive the powers of the occult from a gifted person. Unfortunately, have you heard the story of what's going to happen to this person?
I think that they're going to be bumped off somehow.
Yes, as they drink, and I believe it's a Chateau Neuf Rothschild, 1792. No, 1788 they'll be drinking. Good wine. Shame to see it go. Just as he raises it, he'll get a bullet in the back from a soldier during some sort of battle that's going on in France at that time. I don't know what it is. It involves Louis XVI. It's the end of his reign. There's an enormous tumult. The people are charging the tile works, all of the places where the kings and all these people, the royalty, have traditionally been safe from being assailed by the peasants, will no longer be safe. There's going to be an enormous bloodbath in France at about the same time that my grave is opened. The men who does this, of course, will die, and my remains will then be reburied and placed in a safer vault.
We don't have a lot of time. So I guess
of course,
we never got to the book, of course, but I do want to know the end of the world. Since we're talking about 200 years, I assume we're going to be around for 200 more years. But how long do you think we'll be here until?
Let's see, I've calculated here.
You have a quatrain on it, maybe?
Yes, I was doing a little bit of calculating just before the show began, and I did arrive at a date for the end of the world. I'm always forgetting it because the complications, the calculations are so complicated. The date, I believe it will end, is 3,737, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
So
And
that
that'll be
gives us that gives us quite a while.
Oh, yes. But until then, of course, you might be interested to know.
I'm sorry, we can't plug your book. We've run out of time.
Perhaps we could do another show sometime.
Maybe we'll do another show.
I've got some real interesting predictions you definitely ought to hear.
We'll do another show.
Read the book.
Thank you for being with us. History Today. Buy the book.
Yes.
Buy any book. I'm Caitlin Ward. Bye-bye.
Now buy this.